This video is a continuation from the previous one. Okay, so now I'm ready. I've got everything set up, and while I was off screen, I went ahead and renamed all my layers so that they all make sense to me. And I now know that each of these layers, how they are going to interact with each other. So I'm going to come over here, and I'm going to change my color on the top, my foreground color, by double-clicking on it. And now I can pick literally any color I want. Okay. And once I have picked that color, I can now select another tool over here, and I'm going to start with, let's start with the brush tool. Brush tool. Okay. Now, as I talked about previously when we first started this, you have a whole bunch of options you can now select, including the size of your brush. Now, this brush is very tiny, and if I paint with this, it's going to create a very tiny line. Now, what I can do is I can come down over here. All right, so the first one just talks about what kind of brush it is. And I believe the default brush for this one is just the paint brush. It is showing a brush right there. The next one is the size. So if I click on the pull down, you're going to see it opens up some new options here. This is the size of my brush. You can get a really large brush. And as you adjust it, you can come over on your screen to see how large it is, to see what size the result is. Hardness has to do with how the edges of the brush interact. The brush all the way to the left has a very soft edge, and as you slide it over, it's degrees of getting a harder, more defined edge. Okay, so 100% is going to have a hard defined edge. For this case, I'm going to work with the hard edge, so I've moved it over. You can select brushes from in here by expanding these down, and you'll see here's the difference. This is a soft brush, and it's called soft round, and this is a hard brush. So this is 0, and this is 100, and those are the difference between setting these settings. So I'm going to select the hard brush, the hard round, as my starting place, and I'm going to bring this down a little bit, not that much. There we go. Okay, and then I'm going to work with it. Now you have some other suggestions. You can go ahead and start working with your blending mode, but I'm going to say don't do that. Work with it as a solid color on a layer and blend the layer. And the reason is because if you want to change your mind later, it's easier to change in here than it is to change in here. Okay, opacity is how see-through is the paint. This is fully opaque, meaning it is not see-through at all. As I slide it or adjust it, it is going to make it more see-through. Again, I normally recommend that you work with the opacity of the layer rather than the paint. Just leave that at the default. Flow is how much paint is being put down. That means you're putting down full force paint, and as I scroll to the left, I'm putting down less paint, so it puts less paint on the layer. Now, for an Andy Warhol, you probably are not going to use a full flow. You end up bringing the flow down to something like 50%, so that it's even more see-through, even less paint. I'm going to leave it there, actually. I'm going to set this at 50. And then you have a smoothing, and what that does is softens the effects of the paint. It's whether or not you have little dots of paint or whether you have a smooth coat of paint. And it's kind of like if you've ever worked with spray paint. If you use spray paint that has a clogged nozzle and it spits paint out, that would be an adjustment that's more towards the harder side. And then if you use, if you have paint that just flows smoothly out of the can, it starts to soften and smooth that paint. So I'm just going to leave that as a default. Now you have some other settings in here, but we're not going to worry about those right now, just for the sake of time. So what I'm going to do is I'm now going to come over here and make sure I have selected my layer. I'm going to be painting on this page, on this layer, on my document here. Okay, and I'm going to see that it's associated with my lower right sprite. So it's this sprite down here in the corner, this guy. So my paint is going to now work with this guy. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over here, and with Andy Warhol, one of the things that he did was he painted lips. So I'm going to come over here and paint the mouth. Okay, I'm going to change my color, and I'm going to make it blue, and I'm going to paint the eyes. And you see I'm not being very precise here. Neither was he. And then I'm going to change the color, and I'm going to make it green. And then I can come in and paint my character. I'm just doing this kind of quickly because I can only create a video that's 15 minutes and then YouTube won't upload it for me. So I'm trying to be fast. Okay. So just pretend I'm doing a little bit better job than this. But Andy Warhol, when you look at his work, you realize he wasn't precise on purpose. He wanted his artwork to appear to be hand painted because that was part of the pop art. Okay, so I've completely messed this up, so I'll just redo it. Okay, so green here. Now I'm going to come back and I'm going to pick another color. Just double click, pick another color. Oops. Oh, I don't like any of those. There we go. And I'm going to paint his eyes. Okay, so now that I have done that, this is where the fun stuff is. So I know that that's associated with my lower right sprite. So on that the color level that's associated with that lower right sprite, I paint it over him. I can keep going and do his hair. I can do some polka dots. I can make him striped. Do all kinds of really cool things. Unfortunately, we just don't have time. So what I'm going to do is talk about how we're going to look at these different blending modes. And what they do, I changed up the color, and you see in my sprite, I'm going to zoom in on him there. Oops, I'll change this to plus up here. There we go. And when I zoom in on my sprite, and you can already see how this is, because I scaled him up, how this distorted badly and why you don't want to do it. So make sure you're working with the right size images. And I'll do a video after this on how to select them correctly. Okay, so that's color. And on a PC, you can scroll through these. Luminosity. Nope, it's not letting me scroll. Sometimes it lets me scroll. Saturation, nothing. Sometimes it does nothing. Hue did nothing. Divide. Subtract. And so what essentially I'm doing here, exclusion. Let's get into hard mix. Pin light. Hard light. There we go. So let's stop there. You can go through these and take the time to go through them all and see what they do. There is a list of what each one of these does, and most of the time it does what it says it's going to do, but sometimes it doesn't. So as people that are visual, hands-on learners, it really just helps to go through and try them and see what they do until you start to get comfortable with what they do. There is information in Blackboard that talks about what they do. So I won't cover that here. So now that I've changed this document, this layer to hard light, it impacts how we see through it to the layer below. Same thing with this opacity. Right now it's 100%. I can turn this down. Right, so I changed it to about 86%. And between the type and the opacity, I now have this layer blending with the layer below it as hard light and 86% opacity, and it changes how this looks. Now, if I'd gone in here and spent a little bit more time doing this better, it would look even better, but we're about out of time, so we're going to leave it there for now, and we'll do a little bit more in the next one.